Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Version 1, a podcast where interesting people come to talk about their creative process, imposter syndrome, inspiration, failures along the way, and much more. I'm your host, Waverly, and you can follow the show on Instagram at Version 1 Podcast and subscribe to our Substack, version1podcast.substack.com. You can also find me on buymeacoffee.com/Waverly Colville if you want to support the show. You can listen to this episode wherever you get your podcasts or head over to YouTube to watch the video version. Remember to leave us a nice review and rate us 5 stars. All right, let's get into the episode. All right, everybody, I am here with my guest this week, Dustin Black, the Executive Creative Director at Preston Spire. Dustin, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to chat.
I am so excited to talk to you today. You do so many cool and interesting projects, so there's a lot to dive into. Could you just start with having you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you for the intro. Yeah, my name's Dustin Black. I'm Executive Creative Director at Preston Spire. I have been in the advertising game for 26, 27 years. I actually grew up in Nebraska. I like to call it the cultural hub of the United States, and then moved up to Minnesota after college. So technically, I've lived longer in Minnesota than in Nebraska, so I can consider myself a Minnesotan. But came up here to work in advertising and have worked really hard to develop a blend of creativity at the office and outside the office.
I love that. And we have a shared connection to Nebraska because my sister lives in Nebraska, married a Nebraska guy, went to University of Nebraska, still lives in Lincoln. So I have
Okay.
a love for Nebraska and the
We'll be
Cornhuskers.
driving through for the holidays next week. I'll wave as we go
It's such
make
a
that.
wonderful a city. Like it's so beautiful, it's so cute. Like it's such a like vibrant culture there. Like I love the markets. I love there's so many cute like boutiques and shops and every time because I went to school in Missouri, my sister went to school in Nebraska, but we're from upstate New York and people are always like two girls from upstate New York went to Missouri and Nebraska and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
guys,
how'd
it's
that happen?
amazing. Yeah, and I think that there's like sort of I don't know, growing up in like the East Coast Buffalo or East Coast bubble in Buffalo, sometimes people are like, well, like what's in Nebraska or what's in Missouri? But I'm like, it's really nice, guys. It's totally worth a visit. I love the culture. Everyone's so nice and easygoing. Oh, I love
Yeah,
it.
they've done a nice job of condensing a bunch of cool stuff. And yeah, the Kansas City, St. Louis, like don't sleep on the mid coast there. It has a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. Whenever I go visit friends from college who are still living in Missouri, I'm like, oh, this is so nice. Like, and Buffalo kind of has that like same sort of like Midwesterny vibe, even though we're technically in the East, but just being like good neighbors and yeah, just like a wholesome sort of vibe. I don't know. It's hard to put into words. So love that you're from Nebraska and still based out in the Midwest. When you
Yep, yep.
were when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. I've always kind of had this duality of being really interested in the arts, but also being really good at math. So I spent a lot of time, I think when I was debating like jobs and what I wanted to do, I spent a few years actually in engineering. So I started off in civil engineering, I moved to mechanical engineering, and then I hopped to architecture for a while. I wanted like more creativity. And I realized very quickly that in architecture, the projects run on for a really long time. It's not as creative as I wanted it to be. So I actually had someone in the dorm that was like, I'm starting advertising. And I was like, I can do advertising better than you. I'm going to go do that. And so found it felt like my people, fast creative turn, but also then the business side and kind of the math and, how do you grow a company? So that's how I kind of ended up there.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think advertising is a really interesting mix of creativity, but also sort of like the business or like the number side of it. Do you feel like it kind of building a career in the advertising industry and being in it for so long kind of like sort of scratches both half of your brains in that way, since you kind of like it
Yeah,
seems like you excelled in both areas, you know?
yeah. At the end of the day, advertising's a business. Like we exist to help companies grow. But what makes that fun and creative is like we have to find ways to connect with culture and connect with people and put that product in people's hands in a way that like is useful. And so it's a creative way of like, okay, but how do we grow and who are we going after and what's the demographic and what's happening on social and kind of pulling some of the analytics and some of that left brain thinking and mixing it then with creativity and insight and we often talk about the best ads have a good human insight to it, have some storytelling. And that human insight, called the comedian insight or whatever, because it's this ability to connect across, different demographics or different people with just something that's funny or something that we all relate to as true. Nobody thought corn nuts were funny until Jerry Seinfeld just did a whole bit on corn nuts, and suddenly everybody related to that, and that was funny. So that's using an insight to bring people together.
Yeah, absolutely. As the executive creative director, what does that look like in their day to day? Because I think a lot of people like have an idea of what a creative director is, but don't actually really like know what it is in practice or in sort of like a concrete form, if that makes sense. So, what does that role
Yeah,
exactly entail in your day to day?
yeah. So within advertising, there's different departments. So you have like an account department, a media department, a PR department, and then you have a creative department. And ultimately, the creative department is responsible for taking the brief that maybe the strategic department will come up with and finding a way to bring it to life, like make it interesting. So we take all these briefing documents of who we're talking to and what we need to say to them, and then we go back and say, how do we solve this problem? Is it a social campaign? Is it an earned media? Is it TV spots? And then we kind of mull it over and bring it to life. And so within the creative department, you start off as like a designer or an art director or copywriter and kind of have like your craft, your little niche. And so, if you're a writer, you get teamed up with an art director or a designer, and you go off and solve these problems together. And then you present that work to a creative director, and the it's great because the creative director then has more experience. They've been doing it for a while. They probably have a better sense of, what the client's looking for. They know what the agency is looking for in terms of the type of work they're trying to do. And they connect the dots and they say, oh, these are the three ideas, and here's how you grow them, and here's how you sell them, and here's how you make them better. And so creative directors end up being these mentors or sort of like shepherds of ideas to junior and other creatives essentially. But at the end of the day, creative directors are responsible for, working with strategy and working with account and working with media to solve these complex business problems using creativity.
Yeah, you're kind of like the pilot in a lot of ways, but also like the mentor and the teacher and the overseer and the glue, it sounds
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
between all these different creative departments.
yeah, yeah. And it's really, as a creative leader, your goal is to inspire the team, to constantly remind them, like, hey, it feels like we're here laying bricks all day and it feels like a lot of work, but we're actually building a castle. So, think bigger, dream bigger, and you frame the work and you frame the day to day as part of a bigger story. And that's kind of the goal, is to just kind of always be inspiring and like getting everybody on the same page and getting people excited. And, it's creativity is such a subjective thing, that you have a team bring to you, an idea that's like, very subjective, and they want it to be funny. And so they present it to you as a creative director. And that, the highlight of their day might be you reacting and being like, that's hilarious. I love it. Like, here's what we can do to make it better. Or you have to find a way to be like, it's not on brief, guys. Like, let's go back. We can figure out a different way in. But help them sort of like build the resiliency muscle, build them the creative muscle, and get them excited to continue to find new ways to solve problems.
Absolutely. What were some of your roles before you became a creative director?
Yeah, I started off in the art discipline. So actually in college, I double majored in art and advertising. Uh, it was that kind of duality. Like I liked art. I knew I wasn't good enough to be like a full-time artist. But I also really liked the business side of advertising. So I started off as a junior art director, and then you work your way to art director and senior art director and associate creative director and group creative director and executive creative director. So you kind of just, it's kind of this rote trajectory. And I think we're seeing that change a little bit now with the new generation and just the way AI is coming in and things. Like, we're finding different ways to be creative about what your career trajectory is meant to be. You know, uh, AI right now, unfortunately, is eating away at a lot of junior roles, and that's something that like we want to fix and figure out. So it's like, hey, how do we bring the juniors in and say, no, 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 I need you to come in and be an AI expert. I need you to come in and be a social expert, or I'm going to hire you as a writer, but I'd love for you to, really uh, owned social or something like that. Find like a niche. And so you find ways to sort of like, hey, just because we did it one way in the past doesn't mean that's the way we're going to do it in the future. Let's find ways to bring in and nurture new talent because, the worst thing we could do is let AI take all the junior jobs, and then in 5 or 10 years, we just, we've got an empty runway, and
Mm.
that's not helpful for anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. As a leader, how do you bring in and nurture those junior people so that AI doesn't necessarily take them over or they have, the experience to move up?
I think a lot of it is really sitting down, and I'm a huge believer in like one-on-ones every other week, and then once every 6 months you do a longer conversation. I frame it as in the spring of like, where'd you come from? Like, what drives you? What is it? How did you get here? What are the jobs that got you here, and what drives you? And then in the fall is a little bit more of like, hey, where do you want to go? What are your career aspirations, and what do you hope to do? Because I can help, like, let me see if I can help you. Like, let me see if I can get the projects there. Let me see if I can get the training. Let me see if I can build the career with you. Because we don't ever expect you to like come at the agency and like live here forever. It's like, no, no, no. I want you to come here, make some great work, be happy, and then move on to the next thing and use this as a springboard. So I'm kind of always constantly talking, where do you want to go? And let's figure that out. Or even me, lately has been talking to some of the juniors like, you gotta know AI. Like there's no way around it. So like do this with AI and do this and like helping them figure it out. But we're also really trying to expand how we find talent. I was in a position at my last agency where we were hiring a round of creatives and juniors, and I just happened to be scrolling on Reddit, and I was scrolling the advertising subreddit, and I saw a post, and it was, hey, I'm an aspiring copywriter. I'm really frustrated. Creative directors aren't giving me the time of day. How do I break into the industry? And for whatever reason, I clicked on it, and they were also in Minneapolis. Uh, and I was like, well, this is a little too coincidental. Like, I got to reach out. So I, DM'd him on Reddit, and I said, hey, here's the deal. I'm in Minneapolis too. I've been in your shoes. It's rough. Like, I'm happy to have coffee with you. And so I had coffee with David, and I was like, we do have an internship coming up. Like, I could probably, push your book a little bit or whatever. And so it was just keeping our eyes open to finding talent in new places that maybe aren't the traditional route.
Yeah, that's so interesting that I gotta get on Reddit and maybe start posting more to find jobs myself. But that's really
Yeah, yeah,
cool.
it's a sleeper. Yeah, there's a lot of active people on there participating in conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring up something that I read that you said in an interview when it comes to your leadership style. It says in this article, central to Black's leadership philosophy is fostering, quote, a culture of curiosity. I was wondering,
Yeah,
could you define what a culture of curiosity looks like in practice?
yeah, great question. I firmly believe the only way we are going to solve the complex problems of tomorrow is to continue to be curious. And what that means is, you know, the ideas we have in advertising are way more complex than they used to be. So how do you work with different departments to build an idea? You've got to stay curious and stay curious about other points of view. How do you understand AI and the role it's going to play in the future? You got to be really curious. So there's a level of vulnerability. You have to constantly be able to. I'm blanking on his name. Is it Adam Scott wrote? Was it Rethink? Um, he wrote this really great book on like the ability to Think Again by Adam Grant. That's what it is. Think Again by Adam Grant.
I
Did a
was like,
really
Adam
phenomenal job.
Scott, the actor?
Yeah, Adam Scott. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Parks and Rec. It was like side hustle. No, 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 no. Adam Grant, Think Again. And it's a really great, like, he says leaders need to be able to have the ability to be malleable in their decisions. Like they need to be able to be decisive and have a clear point of view, but then be able to like listen and be curious and change their opinion and like, hey, that's a great idea. Let's move forward with that. And so I think that's the best model for how we solve these complex problems because curiosity is neutral. Curiosity isn't necessarily an attack. So when you're in a situation where you're presenting work or, and they have an objection, to be defensive or to try to judo it too quickly is not the best. That's not great. The best thing you can do is actually have a little bit of curiosity and be like, tell me more. What do you mean by that? Help me understand your line of thinking here. And by being curious and having that like neutral opinion helps you kind of find that third way, and that third way that, to get, where you're trying to go and where they're trying to go. Um, and I think, from a professional level, that's where it goes. From a personal level, it's kind of always be trying to do something you don't know. Don't be scared to fail. Don't be scared to try something new. Somebody once said, like, put yourself in positions you shouldn't be. And by that mean, like, not positions necessarily, but like in situations. Like, I probably shouldn't, whatever. I'm visiting a different town. Like, I don't know if this, like, book club is for me. I'm uncomfortable at this book club. Go to the book club. Go to the movie that, I'm not a documentary person, but you should put yourself in a situation that makes you uncomfortable. Like, have that level of curiosity. And so personally, like, I always have projects that I'm working on that, like, I don't know how to do. And a lot of it is, I have 13-year-old twin daughters, and a lot of it is like an intentionality with, like, teaching them that, like, the best thing they can do is, like, be in a learning mindset and be in a curiosity mindset. Because if they think I have all the solutions, or if they think they need to have a solution to start something, then, that's bad life advice. So I'm constantly starting projects, and I tell them, like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and they'll be like, what's it going to do and what's it going to look, and I'm like, I have no idea. And they see me try, and then they see me fail. There's been projects where I've started over, or I've regressed a lot of steps, and the girls will be like, what's going on? And I was like, I did it wrong, and I'm going to go back and redo it. But the second and third time, you start to get in the habit. So I would rather be good at being curious and be good in the confidence that I'm going to figure it out. That mindset of, like, I don't know, but I'm comfortable that I will figure it out, is really helpful in my personal life, in my creative life, in my professional business life. Because, you're constantly, as you grow through your career, hopefully you're putting yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable, right? Like, I'm getting into meetings I'm uncomfortable with. I'm getting into pitches. I'm getting into, higher and higher levels of conversation. And the first time anybody does that, they're uncomfortable. Like, it's, you talk about imposter syndrome, and, nobody's immune from that. But if you have grown this muscle, and if you've continued to work on this idea of, like, I have some tools that I can ask questions, I can be inquisitive, I can trust myself that I will figure it out at some point, or that it's going to be okay. Uh, that's the best situation. That's the best training you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that because that's the whole sort of like thesis of this show. And that's why I named the show version one, because oftentimes the first version of, whatever you're doing is oftentimes the hardest because you're vulnerable. You might be bad at it. You might be unsure. And so, yeah, I absolutely love that. That's such a wonderful mindset to have.
Yeah. And I love, I've told the girls this a few times. I love that Chinese, is it a parable or whatever, the Chinese farmer, where he says the phrase, maybe so. And I love that idea because it's something along the lines of, like, a farmer's horse runs away, and his neighbor says, "Oh, that's terrible luck," but the farmer says, "Maybe so." Because then the next day the horse comes back and brings a bunch of horses with it, and the neighbors are like, "Good luck, that's great." And the farmer's like, "Maybe so." And the farmer breaks his leg while riding one of the wild horses, and the farmers are like, "Oh," or the neighbors like, "How terrible." And he's like, "Maybe so." But then the soldiers come and they draft young men to war, and they pass over the son because of his injury, and they're like, "Good luck." And he's like, "Maybe so." But the point is, like, in the moment, we have this visceral reaction to want to assign, like, good and bad to it, or, like, this is happening for a reason. But really, like, if you take stock and, like, maybe so, like, I don't know, maybe I got looked over for that promotion, but maybe that's going to open up a bigger opportunity down the road, or, maybe this meeting didn't go well, and I just have to, like, let it marinate, or I've seen the, like, keeping track, a journal, like, a, good and bad journal, because if you keep track of the bad journal and you look at it in 6 months, a lot of those are like, that's not that bad of a deal. Like, it is, maybe so. Like, maybe I ended up in a better place, or maybe, whatever. So it's finding a mindset that lets you be comfortable in the moment and know that, like, hey, it might feel bad now, but that's what growth feels like. And I need to be comfortable and move on to the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great mindset. I'm curious, how did you develop that mindset? Was it through a lot of like failure or mistakes, or maybe there's like an experience from your background? Like, like how did you get to this place? Because it's so like positive and great, but I think that sometimes, speaking for myself, like it's sometimes hard to have that perspective in the moment, you know what I mean? But it's very admirable of that, and I love like what you said. So I'm just curious how
Yeah,
you
I mean,
created
I mean, it's and
it.
this is I don't want to be the social media version of a vacation. Like, nothing's perfect. Like, but it's figuring out like I think within our business and within creativity, it's incredibly subjective and it's incredibly difficult. And I think that, people often say like, what's your greatest strength? And if you're going to be a creative, what's your greatest strength? And I tell them like hands down, like resiliency and the ability to kind of roll with the punches. And so it's something from a junior, like you sort of have to kind of talk about and train because if you carry with you a certain level of self-righteousness or just like letting other people control your emotions with like, I didn't win that award or we didn't win that pitch or I didn't win that meeting or whatever, and you let other people that you have no idea what the client's mindset is when they come in or what their business problem is, or you never know the juror that's looking at your work, like so to let them control your sort of state of mind is that's not healthy. And so you kind of have to just continually have it be a muscle where you're training yourself to like it's okay, sun's gonna rise tomorrow. We'll figure it out, and then maybe so, like maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. But it in this business, I think that's like just a core muscle to how are you going to survive? Because without that, you're gonna burn out, and you're gonna have some like self-righteous burnout moment where you're just raising your fist at the clouds and yelling because our job is full of random subjectivity and horrible coincidences and CMOs that swoop in the last minute and kill your 6 months of work, and you just have to kind of, if you don't roll with it, you'll be in a different business in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dive more into your creative process at Preston Spire. So, when a creative brief or when a company comes to you, I guess what are like the first initial steps when it comes up with coming up with ideas for the project that you're working on?
Yeah, I think this is where having a really diverse group of people is super helpful because the point is to have a lot of different points of view, a lot of different upbringings, a lot of different personalities bring their best self to the job is going to be super critical because that's going to help you find insights and find those human truths that are like super relatable. Uh, and so I think, early on you get a brief and you just start talking. Our job is just so much just like, you know, creativity doesn't happen when you hit it head on. Creativity happens in these margins or in these side conversations or where it's the shower thoughts, right? When you're mowing and when you're doing these side things, that's when your best ideas and stuff start to come from. So you start having conversations with somebody who's not exactly, from your walk of life. And what do you think about corn nuts? And what's your experience growing up with corn nuts? And and eventually you start to pull together some threads and like, oh, that's really interesting. You're right. I have no idea what corn nuts are either. Like maybe we need to spend more time thinking about that. And so you're kind of like listening in this mindset of like, what are these insights and what are these unique things that everybody can relate to that are you think you think will draw people together and be interesting. Um, but there's a lot of banging your head against the wall, and there's just a lot of like, I need to go take a walk, or unfortunately, the web has made it so easy to like be distracted and just like, I'm just gonna go surf Reddit for a while, or I'm gonna, and then that if you're not kind of being intentional about being tangentially creative, you end up just sort of like disappearing for an hour. But even that, pulling from your lifetime of, the book club you shouldn't have been at or the movie that made you uncomfortable, like there's going to be parts and pieces of that you can pick together and pull into a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Does your team use certain like brainstorming exercises or like activities to kind of like generate those ideas?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and you can even search. Anybody who's listening can search for like um, brainstorming prompts or like what would be like so a lot of it is like when we're thinking about advertising, it's like go to the extremes, make it as big as possible. What if it was really big? What if it went away? what if your grandma gave it to you for Christmas? And you just start having these like ridiculous prompts or these ridiculous ideas. And so it's just kind of giving your brain a way through some sort of like formulaic questions to rethink the situation. What if it was, uh, what if there was a tiny version of it, or what if it was only a kid, whatever. And you just, through those conversations of weird juxtapositions, you get into some interesting situations. And I honestly think this is probably the best use of AI. So, obviously AI is one of the biggest things to come through since the internet. And I think it will be a fundamental shift in how creativity happens. But AI right now, at least AI is really good at synthesizing. It's really good at um, summarizing, bringing together complex things, but it's also like a really great partner. And you can sort of do this exact exercise with it where it's like, give me random questions that I can sort of respond to, or give me 100 weird scenarios where I might use corn nuts, or give me 40 insights about corn nuts that I wouldn't think about. And, 39 of those 40 are terrible, but there might be one or two in there you're like, oh, you're right. I didn't think of that. Like let's talk about that. And so is like a brainstorm partner or something to help you just like get out of your own record cycle and think differently. That's where we're seeing a lot of benefit in the creative department with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you know when an idea is the one that you're going to go with? Like, what goes into the decision-making process in that respect?
I mean, there the two parts to that. Like one, we can formulaically say like, hey, a good idea is, has a good insight to it. A good idea has a level of craft to it. A good idea is unexpected. A good idea um, has some media potential. Like you can sit there and put these like objective metrics around it, which I think is important if you have a larger team where you can kind of like, have give them language to talk about it. So there's these sort of objective frameworks that have kind of been developed. But I think subjectively, a big idea is just something you feel and you get excited about. Like, we've all been a part of something where you just, even if it's your friend group and you're like, we're going to go to the Bahamas or whatever for Christmas. And then suddenly everybody's like, oh, and if we're at the Bahamas for Christmas, I can bake my cake and I'm going to bring, and everybody just starts piling on. And it's like easy to talk about that idea. Like, so subjectively, I think that's like one of the easiest ways to see if a big idea is because it instantly gets people excited, like, oh, I haven't thought of that, and this, and this, and this, and this, and you just can build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. How does the company or like the product you're trying to advertise or build a campaign around sort of like affect the creative process? So like, you brought up like cereal as one example. How does that like the fact that it's like a food affect the process versus if you were working on, I don't know, like maybe like a technology company or like a clothing company or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they all have their like little quirks. There's something like a package or something that you can actually hold, like a pizza. I always joke like those are slightly easier because you sort of like have a physical thing to show, like it's easy to see like, a bar of soap or there's these like, so concepting for that is like, how do I just show the soap in interesting situations or who uses the soap or whatever. And then it gets more and more abstract the more it gets into like service categories or whatever, where it's like there's no physical thing and we're just talking about a process or we're talking about like a speed or something. And then it's a lot harder to be like, well, what do you put in an ad or something if it's not like a physical thing? It's like then you have to talk about it in a different way. So like I think that there's as creatives you kind of get into these tropes or these like, oh, okay, cool, we got a product. So that means I can start to do this with it and do this with it and make something out of it. Or no, I've got a service. Ooh, I got to think about how to tell that story and have humans tell that story. Like it kind of sets you up in the world of brainstorming. And I think every brand kind of has a tone, right? So like you kind of start to initially have the conversation of like, who do you want to be? There's fancy titles like archetypes and things like that, which is basically like, if your brand was going to go to a party, who are they going to be? Are they going to be the host? Are they going to be the person that is the jester in the middle of the room that's making everybody laugh? Like, are they going to be the quiet one in the corner that's really smart you need to go to, or if you got a problem or whatever, like, And so that personality type is also like a really great cheat sheet to like how I'm going to start thinking about it and the type of ideas and like the level of like, oh, okay, well, if this brand is the hero that's always going to help me in tax season, I'm probably not going to approach it like I would if it's a jester that's Skittles that just wants to bring me a smile.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. Like if your brand was at a party, who would they be? I've never thought of it like that, but that's a really cool, interesting like thought exercise that I think could be applied to a lot of different things. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I was wondering because as I was looking on Preston Spire's website, I don't know if it's your official like motto, but I've seen it a lot. Is you guys talk a lot about like good wins. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. So we are we exist to be a positive force in the world. Like that's kind of our why statement that we put at the top of when you come in the door and when we start talking, like we exist to be a positive force in the world. And I don't mean that in some sort of philanthropic, like not for profit or like always saving the saving the whales type of thing. But I think that if you're a brand and if you're working for a brand, you fundamentally believe you bring value to somebody's life, and that your brand, no matter what it is, like can make someone's life a little bit better. And so what we try to do is like help identify that good. Like what is it that people really like about your brand? And it's not a philanthropic or a purpose type thing, but it's just like this is why people love, this is why your brand exists and why people love it. And we call that the good, that hidden or that untapped good. And then we work to just make sure people know about that good and show that like, hey, if you're out there talking about like why your brand is great, you're gonna have some wins. You're gonna start selling. You're gonna get people to like come alongside and join this. And and that's a good win. And at the end of the day, too, like a lot of these stories are kind of buried. The good. I worked on Perdue Chicken for years, and Perdue Chicken does a really great job. They're big ag, but they're family owned, and they really intentionally try to raise the chickens right, no antibiotics, and they really try to like, um, uh, you know, be conscientious of the decision that they do. And it's like our job was to like bring that story forward and how are different ways we can tell that story because that's good because people at the end of the day want to participate in good. Like they want to know that story so that if they have to choose between Tyson or Purdue, like no, 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 Purdue actually we're trying to raise the chickens right. Like we're trying to do good. And so it's an evolution of purpose-driven advertising, but it's really meant to be at the end of the day, people are tired of being cynical. They're tired of being rage baited. Like let's just lean in and find the good in your brand and highlight it, and at the end of the day, that everybody will win. Because if good wins, we all win.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely so important nowadays to be positive and lead with positivity. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you've worked on so many different campaigns. I won't make you name them all, but do you have like one that was particularly, I don't know, maybe inspiring or maybe one of your favorite campaigns to work on, or yeah, just one that stands out in your like long storied career?
Um, I'll mention two, and one of them is Herbert and Gerbert Sandwich Shop. And this is like I've always built my career around like chasing creativity, not necessarily chasing the biggest brands or the biggest budget. Because sometimes in advertising, like smaller teams can do something more surprising. They just don't have layers of bureaucracy and layers of focus groups and stuff like that. So Herbert and Gerbert's came to us, and this was maybe 20 years ago, and they wanted to celebrate their 50th or birthday or something like that. And they were like, "You've got 5 grand to make a radio spot." And we were like, "Well, what if we don't do a radio spot? We could do that, but let's do it real quick and easy. But let's build you the world's largest candle cannon to blow out candles on a birthday cake." And I mean, this was like an 05, 06. I don't even think viral had even come out, that word had come out or whatever. So we rented a warehouse. We built this 12-foot cannon. It was a monstrosity, and we blew out birthday candles from 165 feet away. And we had like a little mini cannons that would go out to the different franchisees and stuff like that. But like one day we were like, we're on the front page of this new website, this YouTube or whatever. Like, is that a big deal? Should we be there? And it was like a first example of like a client trusting us and being like, no, 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 you don't need a radio spot. What you need to do is we're going to celebrate in a big way, and we're going to make videos about it that are going to go big on this new YouTube, and we're going to have earned media that gets picked up by USA Today and all these like news publications. And like it was just fun, and it was small and scrappy, but it was like, to build a giant cannon was a lot of fun. So like there's been opportunities like that that I've thinking back, like was a really big, like, that was cool. We got everybody aligned to do something that was, and it was just a ton of fun building this thing. Um, and then on the other side of that, like I look at like some of the larger campaigns, and like Jackson Hole Tourism was a client of mine for 6 or 8 years, and they never had the biggest budgets, but they just had this really great mission of like we came up with the tagline "Stay Wild," which was come stay at a wild place, or if you live there, help us stay wild. Like it was a preservation or sort of like a sustainability message. And they never had the budgets to do like every year like a giant shock and awe campaign or something, but we always did something fun and unique every year. And so when you look at the body of work over that 6 years, I'm really proud of like, we have videos that have Charlie Chaplin and Fleet Foxes and Teddy Roosevelt's great grandson, like, really interesting video like that. But on the other side, we took uh, we call it the VR binoculars, and we took an old binoculars, like those tourist ones you've got, and we gutted it and put a Google lens in there, and we put them at the Super Bowl so people could go up there, and it made it look like they were looking around different points from Jackson Hole.
Wow.
So just like weird, like interesting ways of thinking, that got us the press and just made everybody be like, "Oh, I've never done or seen anything like that before." So, it doesn't have to be big brands to think differently and kind of just have fun.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you think that like you gave two really great examples of, and forgive me, I don't know like the technical terms, but like in real life, like 3D like concepts or experiences in advertising versus like digital, like do you think like we're moving more towards like those things making a resurgence because everything's so digital that people are like, like I feel like, you're on Instagram, you're on social media or
Yeah,
whatever, like and you're seeing an ad every other like thing online,
sure.
right? So like it's
I
easier sort of to get lost, but like those 3D experiences or in real life experiences like are a lot more memorable. Do you think that advertising's making a shift more towards that?
I don't know if more towards that. I think it's in continuing to be an important part of how we approach marketing and brands. Um, at the end of the day, a brand is just, your collection of all your different experiences that brand has given you across all different touch points. And so if it's just one note online, I think it gets stale or isn't that interesting. But if you're doing events, and what's great about events is people take pictures of them and people share that online. And so even though you're probably seeing a lot of it online, it looks different and feels different because it's an event and it's not just a digital ad. And so I think that brands are looking for ways to play a lot of different notes across a lot of different types of conversations. So I think event is continuing to be huge, as people look for that tactile message. It gets funneled online, Uh, I think that's why we're seeing just a huge resurgence of fake products or like merchandise. We just saw Kraft Mac and Cheese did the 65-inch TV for Black Friday where they boxed up, I think it was 65 mac and cheeses or whatever, but it was basically like a giant box of mac and cheeses. It was like a stunt, but it was meant to be like earned media. But by making a product like that, like a stunt product, they can send it to influencers, and then influencers are the media channel, and they're making the things out there. So I think as media has gotten more fragmented and nobody's watching NBC on Thursday night anymore, one channel, we're finding creative ways to play with culture and play with brands and all these different channels. So, really long answer to like, that event is still super important, but I think we're seeing a lot of other things too that are just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your favorite part of the process?
I am a big I love the big idea, and I love like that aha moment where we all get excited in a room. Like, oh, that would be great. And it's that sort of like nobody's put water on it yet. Nobody's like checked it against the budget, but it's just this like what if moment, what if we did this and what if we did this? That gets very exciting, and that it's just it's fun. We're building at that point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to dive into some of your other projects that you work on because you are a creator of all different kinds, which we'll jump into. But before we get into like specific ones, I wanted to ask because I saw on your social media you call yourself, quote, the maker of dumb things. I was wondering, what does that mean, and why did you choose those words to describe yourself?
Great question. Um, I think uh, if I could go back and rename my LLC, I would name it Dozens of Dollars. Because it's like I'm great at coming up with just dumb little things that, like, I'll buy the URL for, I'll go try, go on. It's like I'm a serial hobbyist where it's just like I gotta try doing this, or I need to make this super spoon, and we're gonna make a spoon that fits perfectly in the right, yogurt container. And like you just constantly like, what if we did this, and what if we did this, and what if we made, and so I think that there's just like this mindset of like 99% of them don't go anywhere, and they're dumb, and that's okay, and some of it like it's just a direct. I don't know how deep you dug. I need to start a new channel for this because it's incongruent with my felt fish. But for a while, when Squid Games was really big, I had a huge mouse problem in my crawl space, and so I gamified catching them, and I made the mouse games, and basically just got that old the board game mouse games, or the what was it called, Mousetrap, the old game Mousetrap,
Yeah,
but I put real mouse traps in it, and I put my ring camera on it and filmed it. And at night, the mice would crawl through there and get caught. So it was my way of eradicating mice in my crawl space. But I gamified it and turned it into mouse games, a version of Squid Games. That's dumb. That's just dumb. So like that, like ideas like that over-index on like the dumb quota is kind of why that came up. But on the other side of that are these, felt fish and felt birds, which I currently have at display through October of 26. So if any of you are coming through the Minneapolis Airport, go to gate F4. They're on display there. But it really started as a pandemic hobby of sort of that like what if, like um, I did I had the long story of it is I had an electrical box in the basement I needed to cover. And I was like, well, I want to make a felt pennant of that said, "Be brave, be curious, and be kind." That's what we tell our kids every day.
that's beautiful.
So I reached out to Oxford Pennant. Speaking of Buffalo, the Oxford Pennant, and they've been huge supporters. So shout out. Uh, the They made me a blank, and I used a Cricut to cut this felt pennant together. And again, I didn't know how to use a Cricut. I didn't know what a CNC machine was or whatever, but did this, put it out there, and Cricket saw it, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we want to sponsor you. Can we send you a Cricket?" And Oxford Pennant was like, "Oh my gosh, I love it. Can we make your, can we make your
Wow.
pennant, make it something?" And I was like, "Sure. Can you just send me felt?" Because now I've got to do some work for Cricket. I don't know, And so I was like, sitting around like, well, what I'm going to do? And this was during, 2020 or 2021, where it's just we sitting around with a lot of time on our hands, and I was like, I want to. In my head, I just had a picture of a big felt fish. So I went to Home Depot and bought some 3-inch pink insulation foam. You glue it together, you carve it out, and then you use the Cricut to, or I drew it all in Illustrator, and then I used the Cricut to cut it all out. And I ended up with these giant 5-foot fish, and I just kind of did one at a time and moved on to a bird. And I think that was back, going full circle to the beginning of the conversation was really important to, work through with my daughters or whatever. Like, I have no idea how to use a Cricut machine. Let's figure it out, and they were kind of looking over my shoulder. And, when I was making the bird, I restarted and stopped that thing 4 or 5 times because I was like, I'm not sure how to do this next step. I cut the head off at one point because I was like, I don't like where the head's going. We're going to start over. And like, so to show the girls, like, this is what like figuring stuff out looks like, and it's okay. Um, but I think it was my version of like an adult puzzle. Like
Yeah.
I've never been a big puzzle person, but this was sort of my way of like, I make the puzzle and then I put the puzzle together or whatever. It's very zen. And when you think about tangential work to make you creative, like that was the perfect tangential job to help me find creative ideas. Because at night I would just sit there and glue felt feathers on, or I would glue felt scales on, and you would just kind of go into this like flow zone or this, meditative state. But you could also then be thinking about like, oh, I've got that, Purdue problem I got to figure out, and you're not thinking directly about it, because once you think directly about a problem, you're never going to come up with an answer. But you're tangentially, you're like, oh, I've got a team that's not getting along very well. What do I do to help them? And you're just, you're sitting there gluing this whole time, kind of tangentially trying to solve a problem in the background. So it was kind of a good space to kind of stretch my creativity, but also then just like give myself some mindfulness to solve other problems.
Yeah, that's really cool that both of your creative outlets sort of like work in tandem in that way. Like as you're gluing felt, you're able to like probably think about problems at work or like solve them even, and maybe it's vice
Yeah.
versa. So that's really, really cool. I'm so glad that you brought up your felt sculptures because anyone who's listening, please go to Dustin's website or Instagram and take a look because they are so impressive. I can't even like it's really hard to put into words because they're so detailed and colorful and just amazing. Like I've never seen anything like it. And so I'm so glad that you brought them up. You said for the first one you saw a bird in your head. Like right I think you said that earlier, right? Like you just
Or
saw like
fish,
the
yeah, it's had
or
a
a fish,
fish sit in my
sorry.
head. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
just saw
Yep.
the vision of a fish in your like was it literally just as simple as that? Like you just saw like it just came to you like that or like were you did you like fishing or like like what sort of
No,
like
I had
inspired that
no, I think
idea?
it's uh a lot of creativity is within constraints, right? And I think that's the best way to try to be creative, is to give yourself a bunch of constraints. And so I think the fish came to me because I I don't have a big crafting area. I don't have a big work area. Um, I have a few tools. I have some saws and stuff. So I was like, I kind of like, I need to make a sculpture. I know it needs to be like roughly 4 feet because I don't have space for anything bigger. I know how to glue together foam. I love to carve. Like maybe I can like, and it was just kind of like one step after another, because I couldn't, like, if you sit there and think like, what am I going to make today? You're screwed. Like, there's no, like, that's way too big of a brief. Whereas if you tell yourself like, okay, what's the space I need to work in? What am I good at? What tools do I have? You kind of give yourself this like little box to think in. And so in this case, it's like, I got a bushel of felt sitting here that Oxford Pennant sent me. I've got a Cricut with the CNC machine. You know, what do I do with it? I'm not gonna like suddenly pick up and start making up, random oil painting or something. Like, no, I got these are the tools and this is the stuff I have right in front of me. What do I do to make something interesting out of it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I tell my kids too, when they get like I'm bored or like I don't know. I'm like, look at this drawer. Like, there's a million things. Like, there's yarn for days. Like, I don't know, figure something out. Like, just work with this. Like, make something out of this. Like, you don't, Um, so that's kind of what it was born out of, was out of constraints. Um, since then, I am working on another one. I don't know, I have a QR code on this at the airport where the four, the bird and the three fish are on display, and I get maybe 80 to 100 QR clicks a day, which is pretty great.
Wow. That's a lot.
Just traffic, yeah, and it's weird. I'm not. I mean, I clearly state it's for sale. Anybody listening, they're still for sale. And I've had, several inquiries. They get turned off when I'm like, you can't have it till October 26th. And they're like, all right, we'll get back to you. Uh, but I knew I wanted to make something else to, if I get that much traffic, like what other story am I going to tell? Or like I need to build something else. But I've also gotten really good feedback. Like, felt hard to sell to a commercial installation, like to a restaurant, to a hotel or whatever, because they can't dust it. You can dust it, but it's a little fussy or whatever, right? So I'm actually in the process of making, and you can see this on my Instagram and TikTok or whatever now. It's a uh, similar structure where it's foam and wood, but then I cover it in a fiberglass epoxy resin shell, and I'm slowly painting it now. So I want it to be just as detailed and weird, but I want it to also be dustable so that maybe there's a better chance of selling it.
Wow, that's really cool. That's awesome. Well, we're
Yeah.
excited to see that once it's completed. How long does it take to make one of these sculptures?
If you're checking out, like, the blue fish took like 50 hours.
Wow.
The flower fish maybe took 80 to 100 hours. The bird maybe took 200 hours. It's parts and pieces. It's weekends and evenings and things. And like I said, you kind of just get into a meditative state. The the bird I'm working on now is far surpassed 200 already, and it's just because I didn't know anything going into it. I had no idea how resin worked and fiberglass and like all that. It's just been uh, a much larger learning curve than I expected. So, um, but I don't do it like I'm not an artist, like in the sense of like making art to sell. I'm just kind of doing it because I enjoy it, and it's a great way to spark conversations like this. Even when clients come to town, for the last couple months, I've been like, hey, make sure you swing by F4. So when they show up, like they just, it's a conversation starter, and that's kind of all you're trying to do is, it goes back to curiosity. Like, uh, a lot of times we start talking about, my art, but then it's quickly like, but what are you doing? What are you interested in? What are you making? Like, what are you, and so like, it's a quick way to sort of turn the tables on a curiosity conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're so cool. Hopefully, I'll fly through Minneapolis one day, or I guess not one day. In the next like 10 months, it has to be, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly right.
hopefully,
Yeah, you got
hopefully,
10 months to check it out.
yeah, we'll see. I hope I travel a lot, so we'll see if I can book a layover or a visit to Minneapolis and check out your work in person because those are so cool. Um,
Yeah.
did you, I guess, going into this, ever like sort of expect to have like this success as a sculpturist? Because like getting into the airport, that's so impressive, and like you know, for like people, if you see it, like it's the work you do is just so impressive. Like, did you kind of go into this expecting to kind of have its own journey, or was it just more like, no, just see what happens?
Yeah, no, it's definitely more of like a see what happens, and like uh it's been pleasant, it's been fun, I get random texts from different, you know, got a text from a buddy the other day, and he's like, "Look what my family group text is chatting about." And he's like, they don't even know you or whatever. Um but I think that's where no, there's no intent behind it. Like I think that's where like it was sort of doing it for myself or solving my own problems. Like Um, and I think that's why I enjoyed it, because I think that's where like advertising and a lot of commercial, and they say this about anything, right? Like as soon as your hobby becomes a job, you don't enjoy it anymore. And I think that's where you have to find ways, it goes back to that resiliency conversation, right? Like how are you going to get up and, continue to do it tomorrow and, learn something new or try something new? Because once you get into the rut, that's when it does become work and becomes hard. So like, you know, if it's a project you're not excited about, find some new angle on it or something. Find a new editor to work with or a new technique you want to do or whatever. Because you need to find ways to kind of constantly keep yourself fresh. And I think that's probably the origin of these is just like keeping myself fresh and keeping myself just like engaged creatively,
Yeah.
um, in a way that's not, always as fulfilling at the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever experience like feelings of self-doubt or imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think everybody does. Everybody should, right? Like, I think that's just like a really healthy reaction to growth. When you're putting yourself into that growth mindset and into situations that you shouldn't or haven't been before, maybe that's a better way of saying it instead of situations you shouldn't be, because there's definitely situations you shouldn't be in. But places that make you uncomfortable, right? Like the first time you get invited into that meeting, the first time you're in front of the board, the first time you're presenting to a large room, or the first, and artists is feel the same way. The first time, so I to put it in the fish terms, I've enjoyed making the social content a little bit, but the first two or three times I waited, I made content as I went, but I didn't post any of it till the fish was done, till the bird was done, because I really had I was like I have no right showing art. Like there's so many, I follow so many amazing artists. Like for me to sit there and throw out there and be like, here's a here's a bird I made using a cricket. You know what? Like I like no that. But the more I got comfortable with it, and the more I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. Like it really doesn't matter. I'm overthinking it and thinking people think about it more than I do. Then like this eagle, like I've been posting as I go, which is the first time I've done that. And I have no idea what the end of it's going to look like, but I'm like, we're going to see together. But that's just sort of me putting myself in uncomfortable situations where I felt imposter situation kind of trying to trust my gut that it's going to be okay. And now I'm kind of to the point where I'm like, okay, like now I'm putting myself out there a little bit more. Um, but I think if you're, and anybody who's really interested in this, like search for growth mindset, right? I mean, there's so much study around um, growing an organization, growing yourself mentally, and there's you're in your comfort zone, and you want to get out of that. And you move once you get exposed to something that's new or uncomfortable, you go into the fear zone. And a lot of people cycle between that comfort and the fear zone their whole life. Like, oh, this is scary. I got a new boss. I'm going to go back. I want to be in the comfort zone. When really you want to be in the learning zone and the growth zone. And so you kind of initially you circle between the fear and the learning, right? Which is kind of what I was doing with my social posts. Like I was scared, I had imposter syndrome, but I was kind of learning how to do it and putting it together. And now eventually I'm kind of trying to move to the growth zone and the learning zone where you're like, it's going to be okay. So do anybody who's stuck in any of that stuff, just Google that. And there's a million, it's where AI is really helpful. Like, here's what I'm struggling with. Help me find a growth mindset to get me to the next stage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great way of putting it and such great advice. So thank you so much for sharing. And I know we're all excited to see the Eagle once it's completed. um
I am too.
um looking back on your decades of experience and all your various creative projects, including the felt sculptures, and we don't even have time to get to your book or your ice cream brand or all your other projects, so I'm sorry, you have to come back for part two. But I'm curious, as you kind of like look back, what role do you think failure has played for you?
Great question. I mean, I think that goes back to that proverb, right? Of like how you view failure. Um, because there's going to be tough times in everybody's career, and there's going to be like it's almost like a reframing of it's not failure, it's just figuring out the next version of you. And so, when you sit there and say, "Man, that was a massive mess up or a massive failure," then you just have to sit there and say, "Maybe so." Or maybe that was you just getting to the next phase or figuring out like, you know what? You're not an ice cream person. You're gonna go to maybe so. Like, you're gonna figure out at the next phase. Or then I'm that much smarter the next time something like that comes around. So it's like I think it's you kind of have to just frame failures as a way to like learn and grow from it and not look at it as failure, but just as like, well, now I know that.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you define creativity?
That's super. I think it has to be super subjective, right? Like, I think everybody's creative. Like, I think that anybody that anybody is creative, and it's just the way they frame it or the way they think about it, right? Because who was it that always says like, if you want to know what the most efficient way of doing something, you hire a lazy person, because they're going to be really creative and solve it in the
Mhm.
simplest, laziest form or whatever, right? Like, uh, no matter what job you have, you're finding creative ways to solve problems. Even my wife and I juggling our kids' schedule, like we have to find creative ways of solving it or creative ways to like, reach out to relatives. Like there's just so creativity is just a constant mindset of not assuming the way that it's been done before is the exact way it has to happen now, but just being open to possibilities and open to different ways of seeing it or thinking about it. And if you think of it that way, then like it is, what are different ways to think about drop off schedule? What are different ways to think about this process? What are different ways to think about, how we sell corn nuts? Because, there's probably a better solution out there than one that's been solved.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is your definition of success?
Woo. Wow, you pulled the heater, the big ones at the end. Like we're gonna have to extend this another hour. I think people confuse happiness and contentment a lot, right? And I think that there's this chasing of when I get when I blank, I'll be happy. When I get that promotion, I'll be happy. When I make this much money, I'll be happy. And there's like this mental game of doing the math of what it could be. Like you're living in the future and you're letting the future kind of rob you of the present. And I say this as someone like who struggles with this as well, where like, I'll be successful when X. And that never it's never fulfilling. I mean, there's like you can go through psychology and it's like, you know, people say like when I make 100 grand, I'm going to be happy. Well, no, like your happiness index, you're happy for like an extra three weeks, and then you're back to the same level of happiness. And so you kind of have to like, when it comes to success, figure out what motivates you, like what drives you, for me, it's solving things in unique ways and trying to like live a creative lifestyle and like, so like success for me is like I'm able to do that, you know? And it's not tying it to external factors that you can't control, right? Like it's not, you may never get the job exactly like you want or you win that award or, whatever, like tying those to those external factors is such an arbitrary thing. Like those are great byproducts. Like if you win the award or if you get the job or whatever. But if you're sitting there trying like I'm gonna try to not be a jerk today. I want to try to help people get better. I want to develop careers using creativity. You know, then you've kind of made it. And I got a version of this question the other day in an interview. I was interviewing um a junior art director or whatever, and she said something, and she was like, "It's like, how do you like? What's it like to be so successful or whatever?" And I was like, "What?" It took me back. I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I can show you. Go on to LinkedIn. There is a million people more successful than me. Like, are you kidding? Like, there's like you can just sit there and laundry list out like these weird sort of like that's what social media has done is ruining our lives of like like comparison and that's where you have to be really careful because it's like, in her eyes, she's like, you're being successful. And in my eyes, I was like, are you like, no, I'm struggling day to day, just like all of you or whatever. And so I think there's just a mindset that you have to recognize what feeds you and really work and strive toward that and try to keep like a long tail view of it because there's going to be ups and downs. But if you kind of like, you know, I'm doing okay, like cool, like that contentment, it's asking a goldfish, how the water is. It's like, what do you mean the water? It's like the water's all around you, like that, like you got a lot going on. So long answer to say, like I don't know what success is. It's just like I think if people can, if you can find a way to like, I don't know, be okay and like strive to do something you like to do, But that's what's great about creativity too, is it's within your control. Like even if you got a terrible job you hate right now, like I don't know, doodle something on the side and find a way to have a bit of an outlet or set a goal for 5 years and work toward that goal of getting yourself in a different situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ever changing and it's fluid too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dustin, this has been so wonderful. Are you ready to move into the lightning round?
Oh, hey, yeah, let's do it.
All right. What is something new that you've tried lately?
Mm, I should have prepped for these. I forgot you sent me these. These are great questions. Um, this whole eagle thing was new. Like the whole like how do you do fiberglass with an epoxy resin? Like I had no idea how to do that and it made a mess and it turned out very mediocre, but I'm running with it.
Do you have a lesson or a message that you want to share with listeners?
Yeah, just continue to be curious. Like ask questions. Curiosity is neutral, and like just go in to every conversation with like, what can I learn from this person?
I love that. I'm gonna put curiosity as neutral on like a sticky note and put it on my laptop so I see it every day because I absolutely love
Amazing.
that. What is one thing you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
Um, I think that's I mean something along the lines of the enjoy the journey. Like I definitely worked too hard maybe the first 8 years, 10 years. And so I think that was probably where I was caught up a little more in like the outside metrics of what success was. And I would have just said like relax. Like it's gonna be okay. Like life is short. Like go, whatever. Go get that drink with whoever and relax.
Absolutely. All right, Dustin, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. And I had such a wonderful time and learned a lot during this conversation. Where can everybody find you, check out your work, support you, see the felt sculptures, all of the things?
Sure. No. I'm an executive creative director at Preston Spire. So prestonspire.com. If you want to work with me professionally, that's there. My personal website is dustinblack.com. So you can go there and see some of my work history and some of my play. That will connect you to my Instagram and TikTok and things like that. And then, yeah, those are the two big ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dustin.